They whispered behind her back, laughed when she walked by, and treated her as if she didn't belong. She was different, and for that alone, they turned her life into a cruel game. What started as small jokes grew into something far more vicious until it seemed like the world itself was against her. But what no one expected was how quickly things could change. Because sometimes the very cruelty meant to break someone becomes the spark that ignites a storm. And when karma finally arrived, it didn't knock, it crashed through the door. The only question is, who was left standing when it did?
She didn't ask to stand out. All she wanted was what everyone else seemed to have: an ordinary life, a place where she belonged. Her name was Amina, and to her, moving to this new town felt like the start of something hopeful. She pictured making friends, joining activities, finally feeling like she fit into the crowd. She carried that hope with her on her first day of school, her books pressed tightly to her chest, her smile careful but genuine. But the world she entered was not as welcoming as she had imagined. From the very beginning, the looks followed her, lingering, curious, sometimes hostile. Her skin tone, her accent, even the way she dressed became things people noticed before they saw her heart. And though no one said it aloud at first, she could feel the invisible line that had been drawn. A line between them and her. Still, Amina tried to ignore it. She raised her hand in class, eager to prove herself. She walked the halls with quiet dignity, hoping her kindness would be enough to bridge the distance. In the evenings, she told herself it was only a matter of time before things changed. She clung to that fragile thread of hope, not realizing how quickly it would be tested. Because beneath the surface, tension was building, and soon the small, subtle glances would transform into something far more cruel.
At first, it seemed like the whispers would fade with time. She told herself that maybe they just needed to get used to her. But the truth was harsher. Every day, the stares grew colder, the laughter sharper. In the hallways, books were knocked from her hands. In the cafeteria, her seat was accidentally taken, forcing her to eat alone. They didn't even try to hide it anymore. She was an outsider, and they wanted her to feel it.
What cut deepest wasn't the noise, it was the silence. When cruel jokes were thrown at her, no one spoke up. When she was shoved aside, no one offered a hand. The world around her had decided she didn't deserve protection, and that isolation was heavier than any insult. But the cruelty didn't stop in private spaces. It spilled into classrooms, into public streets, into the very moments when she tried to hold her head high. One afternoon, she walked into class prepared to give a presentation. She had spent days practicing, her notes carefully written out. But as she stood at the front, a low hiss of mockery spread through the room. Snickers, whispers, eyes rolling. She pushed forward, her voice trembling but steady. Then, a paper ball struck her shoulder. The laughter erupted, filling the room. The teacher hesitated, just long enough for the message to sink in. She was alone. The more she tried to disappear, the louder the cruelty became. It was as though her silence gave them permission. One day, her locker was plastered with hateful notes. Another, her name was twisted into slurs and shouted down the hallway. The walls seemed to close in, each corner reminding her of her difference, each step echoing her isolation. And the cruelest part? The ones who heard her smiled as if it was all just a joke, as if she wasn't even human enough to be wounded. Still, she carried on. Because what choice did she have? She told herself to be strong, to endure, but even strength has limits. And as the weeks dragged on, the cruelty reached a point she could no longer ignore. A breaking point was coming, a moment when everything would shift. Because deep down, something was stirring, something they never saw coming. The laughter was loud, the cruelty relentless. But they had forgotten one thing. The world has a way of balancing itself. And when it did, the ones who mocked her wouldn't be
be laughing anymore.
It happened on a day that seemed no different from the rest until it wasn't. Amina walked through the hallway, clutching her books, trying to blend into the crowd. But today, the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, sharper, echoing off the walls. By the time she reached her locker, the circle had already formed.
Surrounded her with mocking eyes, voices dripping with venom, words ugly, cruel, unforgettable, were hurled at her like stones. She froze, her heartbeat pounding in her ears, her hands trembling against the metal door. Then, in a sudden burst, someone yanked her backpack away and dumped its contents onto the floor. Papers scattered, notebooks tore open, pencils rolled under shoes that crushed them without care. The laughter was deafening. She bent down, tears stinging her eyes, trying to gather her things. But before she could, a voice rang out, cold, cutting, "Go back where you came from." Those words pierced deeper than anything else. They weren't just mocking her, they were erasing her, denying her right to exist here. In that moment, it wasn't just her books that had been scattered, it was her dignity, her hope, her sense of belonging.
Yet, as she stood there, something inside her shifted. Her tears blurred the faces around her, but her spirit hardened. She straightened, clutching her torn notebook to her chest. The hallway was silent now, waiting for her to crumble, but she didn't. She lifted her chin, her silence louder than any insult. Because though they thought they had broken her, they hadn't realized the truth. This was not her end. This was the moment that would change everything. In the days that followed, the laughter faded, not because they suddenly found kindness, but because their cruelty had been seen. A teacher finally stepped forward, witnesses spoke, and the truth spread beyond the walls of that hallway. For once, the silence that had protected the bullies was broken. And as the whispers turned into accountability, Amina realized something important. She had never truly been alone. There were people willing to stand by her. They had just needed the courage to rise, too.
For Amina, the scars of that moment never vanished, but neither did the strength it gave her. What was meant to break her became the fire that pushed her to succeed, to prove that her worth was never theirs to decide. She carried her pain like a banner, transforming it into a voice for others who had been silenced.
And isn't that the cruel irony? That sometimes it takes suffering to awaken others to injustice. That it takes one person's humiliation to expose the prejudice hiding in plain sight. But Amina's story is not just her own. It's the story of countless others. People judged, mocked, erased for the simple act of being different. Amina found her strength. She refused to be broken. But how many more are still left to suffer in silence? So I'll leave you with this. If you ever find yourself in the crowd watching cruelty unfold, will you choose the comfort of silence or the courage to speak?